If you're like me, when you picture a roller coaster, chances are that what comes to your mind is a lot like Coney Island's Cyclone. Tall and wooden, with flags waving at the top and cars traversing tight curves on their way to high peaks and steep descents. And I think there's a good reason for that. Although earlier varieties of coasters like L.A. Thompson's Gravity Railroads attained a degree of popularity, it wasn't until the 1920s when designs like the Cyclones achieved massive popularity and spread across the US and then the world. The Coney Island Cyclone is an iconic roller coaster, one that, although it doesn't seem to have made a huge impact when it was first built, has grown to become a symbol for all roller coasterdom, for the fate and fortunes of Coney Island itself, and the subject of one of the best comedy routines from Camille Nanjiani.
The single most terrifying experience of my life, and I'm from Pakistan.
Today on Meet Me in Dreamland, we are going to explore this survivor of Coney Island's golden age, from its beginning, through its various near destructions, and right to the present day, when it has become a treasured part of New York's identity and the roller coastering world as a whole. So won't you meet me in Dreamland?
Meet me tonight in dreamland, under the silvery moon. Meet me tonight in dreamland, where love's sweet roses bloom. Come with the love.
Welcome. If you haven't visited the channel before, Meet Me in Dreamland is an exploration of Coney Island's golden age of the early 20th century, when things that we take for granted, like amusement parks, roller coasters, and dark rides, were just experimental ideas that were being tried out for the first time. The Cyclone was the last in a lineage of roller coasters to be built on the land at 10th and Surf Avenue. The site was originally occupied by one of the United States' first roller coasters, L.A. Thompson's Switchback Gravity Railroad, built in 1884, and which I discuss more in detail in a previous video, which you can see here. The Gravity Railroad was replaced by the Giant Racer in 1911, but after 16 years of operations and a few deaths, it was closed down and the land bought by Russian immigrants Irving and Jack Rosenthal. Irving Rosenthal had been a part of the amusement park world ever since he was 10 years old, when he began selling souvenir beach pails and shovels at Steeplechase Park, just down the street from the eventual site of the Cyclone. Once Irving and Jacob reached teenagerhood, they went in together on a second-hand merry-go-round, which they operated successfully in New Haven, Connecticut. And with that sweet, sweet merry-go-round money, they had decided to expand their amusement offerings, and seeing the success of coasters like the Thunderbolt and the Tornado, they landed on the idea of a new, state-of-the-art roller coaster as the way to do so. And where else would you build a new roller coaster in 1926 but the place where Irving got his start, the very center of the amusement park world, Coney Island. With a $100,000 investment, because people in New Haven were really into riding merry-go-rounds in the 20s, the Rosenthals contracted with Vernon Keenan and Harry Baker, coaster designers who between them were responsible for the construction of over 50 roller coasters. The Cyclone opened on June 26, 1927. It featured 3,000 feet of track in a figure-8 pattern, a top speed of 68 miles per hour. The average for roller coasters at the time was 30 to 40 miles per hour, and a 90-foot drop, although it would later be lowered to 85 feet, and a huge illuminated sign. It was promoted as the fastest and highest roller coaster in the world, and it was immediately successful, with Billboard magazine stating that it drew crowds from its opening until 2 a.m. all summer long. Oh, also a person with dwarfism would zap you with an electric paddle as you exited the ride because... why not? If all that weren't enough, even more riders were attracted when Charles Lindbergh himself rode on it several times soon after returning from piloting the first non-stop airplane flight to Europe. According to Lindbergh, a ride on the Cyclone is a greater thrill than flying an airplane at top speed. Even when the Great Depression crippled the amusement business as a whole, the Cyclone managed to remain profitable until it met its first of many existential threats, Robert Moses. Any history that delves into mid-century New York will eventually cast Robert Moses as a villain, and for good reason. As an urban planner, he is mainly remembered for destroying New York neighborhoods to make way for freeways and high-rises, demolishing the original Pennsylvania station, campaigning against free Shakespeare in the Park performances, and even, according to one of his employees, suggesting that public pools keep their water temperatures low because that would discourage African Americans from swimming. And for some reason, he really seemed to hate Coney Island. Admittedly, Coney Island in the mid-20th century was no longer the domain of Manhattan's vacationing elite as it had been in the late 1800s, but rather a rowdy, chaotic, and often dirty place that ran counter to Moses's vision of a pristine, neatly ordered cityscape. In 1939, Moses asserted that the beaches of Coney would better serve New Yorkers if the amusement parks, saloons, hot dog stands, and restaurants could be pushed back from the Riegelman Boardwalk by 400 feet or so. This would have put the Cyclone directly in the path of destruction. There was an outcry, and Moses, not yet at the height of his power, acquiesced, changing his plan and allowing the Cyclone to remain. And a good thing, too, for only 10 years later, the Cyclone was apparently responsible for a miracle. Emilio Franco, a former coal miner and World War II veteran from West Virginia, had been rendered unable to speak by an unknown force in 1943 and remained mute from that time forward. That is, until in August of 1948, he rode the Cyclone. According to an interview with the man in the New York Times, when he stepped off the ride with his cousin, he said, and these were his first words for 5 years, "I feel sick. Cyclone be praised!" Unfortunately, as the 50s turned to the 1960s, Coney Island continued to lose its luster. Luna Park had closed in 1944, leaving Steeplechase as the only one of the original Coney Island parks remaining. And by the 1950s, our nemesis for this episode, Robert Moses, had attained even more power to shape New York's destiny when he was appointed city coordinator of construction. And Coney Island had never really left his crosshairs. As he put it, such beaches as those on Coney Island lend themselves to summer exploitation, to honky-tonk catch-penny amusement resorts, and shacks built without reference to health, sanitation, safety, and decent living. Moses destroyed low-income urban neighborhoods in Manhattan, then destroyed neighborhoods and businesses on Coney Island to make way for public housing in which to settle those folks whose neighborhoods he had destroyed in Manhattan. His favorite approach to public housing was huge high-rise towers, which soon dominated the Coney Island skyline. Somehow, even as the old Coney Island of amusement and pleasure resorts fell away around it, the Cyclone itself survived. Although it was doing much less business than in the earlier part of the century, it was still making just enough money to hang on. In 1957, the Cyclone gained a new neighbor when our old pal Robert Moses announced his intention to demolish the historic Castle Clinton in Manhattan, where the New York Aquarium had been housed since 1896. The aquarium pulled up stakes and moved into the lot beside the Cyclone, which had previously been occupied by Dreamland Park. Moses never did manage to destroy the castle, which he called an ugly wart, but the aquarium was pushed out to Coney anyway. Sadly, the Cyclone and its new neighbor did not have a great relationship, especially in the early years. By 1967, the Cyclone was in trouble once again. Declining ticket sales had led its current owner, Silvio Pinto, to spend less on the coaster's upkeep, and the result was now a dilapidated, dangerous-looking ride. The aquarium next door was, at the same time, looking into expanding, and the land beneath the Cyclone was perfect for its plans. In 1969, the city forced Pinto to sell them the coaster via eminent domain for $1.2 million, and it seemed that the cyclone would soon be replaced by the aquarium's planned swamp exhibit. Really. Except it didn't happen. The aquarium, for all its big plans, did not actually have the money to build the expansion, and protesters had organized a Save the Cyclone campaign in the meantime. Rather than simply demolish the coaster and let the site sit vacant, pissing everybody off, the city negotiated with Silvio Pinto to continue running the cyclone. He did so for the next 5 years, even as the coaster continued to decay. By 1975, however, city inspectors declared that the cyclone needed serious repairs, especially to its structural supports, which are important. And the cost to do so would amount to approximately $127,000, or $745,000 in today's money. Unwilling to shell out for this with tax money, the city put the operation of the site for a 10-month contract up to public auction. The Astroland amusement park won the auction, refurbished and repaired the coaster, and bought it some more time even as the aquarium filed for a federal grant to implement their planned swamp expansion. They won the grant, and once again the sword of Damocles hung above the coaster, and the protesters gathered. And yet another last-minute save, an incoming politician swooped in to spare it from the guillotine. Parks Commissioner Gordon J. Davis was sworn in on January 23, 1978, and was of the opinion that Coney Island's legacy as a playground for New Yorkers should be saved, starting with the cyclone. This was a turning point in the coaster's life. There were still challenges to be faced, but from this point forward, it was no longer in the crosshairs of a city eager to develop the land beneath it, but the conversation now focused on preservation, culminating in 1988, when the coaster became an official New York City landmark. With the Robert Moses types out of the picture and a generation of New Yorkers who looked back at Coney Island's glory days with fondness, the cyclone now became a cornerstone of a growing movement to revitalize Coney Island by folks like Charles Denson and Dick Zigan, who both have worked tirelessly to bring the island's history back into the national consciousness through organizations like the Coney Island History Project and the Mermaid Parade. The Coney Island History Project even used the building beneath the cyclone as its headquarters before moving to its present location on 12th Street. Today, even after weathering threats such as Hurricane Sandy and COVID-19, the cyclone is going strong and is managed by the nearby New Luna Park. It was refurbished in 2012 and continues to draw long lines during the summer season, and it's a bona fide part of New York identity. It has appeared in movies like The Warriors, a Seinfeld episode,
Run Cyclone,
and even became an official part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe in Spider-Man: Homecoming. So, it may not be the tallest, the fastest, or even the oldest, but the cyclone is, in true New Yorker style, a survivor. Thank you for watching. If you have cyclone memories, I'd love for you to share them in the comments below. As for myself, I've never ridden it, even though I've been to Coney Island a few times. Instead, when I was a kid, I rode a knockoff version at Astroworld, the Texas Cyclone. The owners of Astroworld in Houston had actually planned to purchase the Coney Island Cyclone, but decided that it probably wouldn't survive the journey, so wound up making their own. And it was terrifying when I was 10. Oh, and you know what? If you enjoyed this video, leave a thumbs up below. If you'd like to see more like this, hit subscribe. And if you'd like to help this channel persevere, grow, and continue bringing you stories like this, head over to my Patreon at patreon.com/TyBannerman. And as always, thank you for meeting me in Dreamland.